Okay. Most of you are beginning to settle down. That's the thing about taking a break. It's so seductive. It just takes you off into another world. But I think it was probably necessary. Hi! Hi. You know, one of the really nifty things about getting older is that you get to get the pieces of the puzzle put together. I think that life sort of unfolds. I have a sign in my kitchen that a friend sent me years ago saying, "This life is only a test. If it were a real life, you would have been given directions as to where to go and what to do." It's really a kind of a mystery, I think, life. But one of the things is I've found in my senior years here is that I get to understand some of the things that happened and that were part of my experience throughout my life. So that's really kind of fun. So I thought I'd just share a few of them today and see how they weave in terms of the whole subject of ceremony and ritual and mystery. Because I think the workshops that I have been doing for the last 10, 12 years, one of the first things we established that life is basically a great mystery. Beyond, not the kind that we see on television that we get solved in an hour, but the kind that is way beyond our deeper understanding. So let me just give you a few sort of Reader's Digest highlights here. I grew up about straight in that direction, up on 110th Street, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, which is the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. And my father was headmaster of what was then the choir school. And so I lived at a school of 40 boys, a boarding school, and with a couple of brothers, and in a world that was made for men, and there really wasn't a lot of space for me there. But it was quite in terms of how do I fit in. But it was an amazing space. A friend of mine, I was showing it to her some years ago. She'd never seen the place. And she said, "Jane, it must be hard to have a peak experience after growing up in a place like this." But I certainly encountered, this is an Anglican church, and I certainly encountered a lot of ceremony and ritual from early on, from before I could remember. But about 5 years old, I started sort of saying to myself, this isn't the whole story. What about all those people out on Amsterdam Avenue? They don't know about this good stuff in here, And it didn't quite make sense, and I had no way to explain that or say that to anybody, and I carried that around with me till I was over 50, can you believe it? And then I started saying it out loud, and I started exploring. But meanwhile, let me just say that ceremony and ritual continued throughout my growing up years. I went off to a boarding school up the Hudson, about 50 miles from here, and the school overlooked the Hudson, just as it makes a great giant right turn and narrows. It was a beautiful place. And it was run by Episcopal nuns, and so there was a lot of ceremony and music and ritual. And in my senior year, as senior president, I got to carry the cross down to the chapel every Sunday. Oh, that was so exciting. The whole school came behind me. And so ceremony had a lot of perks to it and a lot of benefits and so forth. But my senior year, just the night before I graduated, I remember leaning out the window of my room overlooking the river and saying to myself, I'm not going to do this anymore. It just came very clearly to me. I'm not going to do this anymore. Being in charge of others and being responsible and all that. So I went off to college and had a wonderful time in theater, and I wasn't responsible for anybody, hardly myself. But I had a good time. I didn't do anything very naughty, but I did learn one of the great things, one of the enormous benefits and gifts that I had in my college life was studying under Hallie Flanagan Davis, one of the great pioneers in American theater history, anybody who knows history of the theater. And from her, I really connected with what I had in a vague way understood but hadn't been able to have articulated before, was that everything and everything is interconnected and interdependent. And this was long before science was telling us that story. This is way back in the 50s, the ancient days. And the other piece that, of course, I captured and have kept on holding tight on ever since is that theater is about storytelling, of course, and it is about going to the essence, finding what is at the core, what is the truth. Not in an absolute way, but what is the essence of what is being expressed and what the story that we're telling, wherever we are in the process. And so that has really influenced my life deeply ever since. I married and started raising 4 children, one by one, and I discovered in that marvelous adventure the wonder of story and ritual and ceremony. That just the ordinary things of raising children and the ceremonies of birthdays and holidays and just blowing out the light at night, that kind of thing. They loved it. I loved it. It was a marvelous, wonderful experience and continues to be. Just last week I was with my 4 children and 3 of my grandchildren in Virginia. We were celebrating an early celebration of my birthday, and we got to have rituals and ceremonies, and I got to be a pirate along with my grandchildren, and we got to attack my children on the island, and they attacked me. I mean, it was really exciting. But and we had pirate badges because we all had to have our one eyes to see. But the point is that it was really acting out some other very deep rituals of breaking free and being independent and then coming back into harmony again. I mean, these are ancient mythic stories that people have been telling and acting out over the centuries. So it goes on, it continues. But let me just say that about in the early 70s, I had an adventure that was really, really unexpected. I found myself in turbulent water in Rhode Island, in a place where I had swum all my life, one summer day, with somebody who was drowning. And I was trained in life-saving, so I did what you do to help somebody to ashore, and we were in deep water with rocks, and as I tried to get her up on the rocks, she kept, of course, pushing me down, which is what drowning people do. And I kept trying to get her up, and every time the undertow pulled us back, both into the sea again. And as this was going on, without any warning, a voice came into my head that I had never heard before, and the voice said, "You're going to have to let go of her." I was utterly shocked. What? Somehow, that moment gave me some extra energy, some extra power, and I managed one more time to take her to the rocks, and I pushed her up and said, "Hold on." She managed to hold on and climb out, and with my literally just my fingernails and my toes, I hung on to the barnacles covered with seaweed. And if you ever know anything about barnacles, they're razor sharp, and seaweed is like butter. But I managed to hang on and climb out. And I was fine, and she was fine. But what really puzzled me was that voice. What was the meaning of that voice? Believe it or not, it took several years for me to understand that what that voice was telling me, that I was going to have to let go of the false self, the self that was always looking after other people, always rescuing other people, always taking care of their problems. I had started and run a business called Can Do, taking care of other people's problems, social work for the affluent. I was very successful. Lots of people with money need things solved and have problems that they can't solve. But there was a part of me that was not being nourished, that was not being taken care of, that was not healthy. But it took several years for me to really understand that. And finally, 4 years later, I found myself in an idyllic surroundings in Genève property in France, and every night I found myself having a waking vision. I wasn't dreaming, this was awake. This went on for 2 weeks. And the vision was that I was lying in my own coffin, and they were about to come and nail on the cover. That's a pretty symbolic vision. And I had no idea how to get out, believe it or not. So that earlier message of you're going to have to let go of her somehow had now become much more of an emergency. Well, the next few years were somewhat turbulent, as you can imagine, and in fact it turned out that I had to leave. In order to get out of that coffin, I had to leave everything that I'd ever known or cherished and cared for. And somehow I found my way back to the city where I had been nourished here, and not really knowing quite why I was here, but I felt Spirit was moving me back here. And one of the first things that started happening, and interestingly enough, it happened right back at the place of my birth at the cathedral, but the dean at the time started having spirituality conferences. And they went on for about 3 years. And I heard about this, so of course I went right up there, and I met some of the most amazing teachers of the time: Matthew Fox, Brian Swim, David Spangler, on and on. Many wonderful, extraordinary teachers and pioneers at the time in the early 80s. And amongst them, and they started helping me understand that question that I had raised as a child. This isn't the whole story. And I was able to really explore some of the other spiritual traditions of the world and look at it through new eyes and open up into just understanding that there is a lot more there, a great deal more. And during that period, I again met somebody who changed my life, Barbara Brennan, who some of you may know. She's a healer. At the time, she wasn't doing any of her teaching, really. She was just starting off, but she did a little workshop, and again, the voice said to me, "You need to learn what she has to teach you." Oh, okay. Well, about a few months later, she had some workshops and so forth, and then she started a series of classes, and so I just knew I needed to study with her, and I did for 2 years. It was long before her book came out, her first book. She now has 3 schools on 3 continents. I think each of them have about 500, and they're accredited 4-year colleges, schools. But I learned a great deal. It was all about the human energy field and how energetically this ties in with our physical being and all of our everything ties together. So the things that I had been questioning began to come more fully into view, what they were about. During this time, as I was studying with her and learning other traditions, I was approached by somebody who had he was an IBM systems designer, and he needed some help with developing an interpersonal system, interpersonal communication. And so we worked together and developed stress management, basically. And this is where I really began to understand how changing the story changes everything. You can't change what happened, but you change the story. You tell yourself and the world about what happened, whether it was yesterday or just this minute or when you were 2 years old. And so, and I put all of this work that I've been doing together and in working with people in terms of stress management and helping them understand about story and how story really colors our expectations or the story we tell us when we go in. You all came here today expecting something to happen, expecting whatever that was. You may be disappointed, you may be excited, you may be surprised, you may be, I have no idea. That's your story. The person sitting next to you may have a very different story of what's going on here. Okay? But during that time of starting with the stress management work, I